Good morning, good afternoon from sunny Miami. Today we have the pleasure of having Per Sjoborg. He's a scientist from Sweden. I was lucky enough to bounce around the web, and I ran across his site, Robots and Depth, and as well as Flexibility Envelope. And robotics is an area which is, as people know, probably like me, we don't know much about it, but we know that it's impacting medicine. And I'm just kind of curious as to find out about Per, because he's done an enormous amount of work in the field of robotics, and have him go through his project. So welcome, Per.
Thank you very much. And when you say I'm a scientist, I am a gentleman scientist, not a proper one.
Okay.
I am very interested in the area, but I'm not formally a researcher or anything like that. I am, however, a robotics entrepreneur, starting a number of companies in this area. And as you say, I think this is a tremendously interesting area that's going to have huge impact on everything we do going forward here. The coming 15, 20, 30 years, we're going to see so much change in every area, including medicine.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from it. Why don't we start at the very beginning? You live in Sweden, near Stockholm?
Yeah, so you said it's a sunny Miami, and sadly this comes from you in the evening of a very cold and rainy Stockholm. So yeah, it's not. I would prefer to be with you in Miami.
Yeah, it's very nice now. So you mentioned you're a gentleman scientist. Did you kind of always have a liking for it in school?
Yes, absolutely. I am an engineer by training and a computer programmer by vocation. So that's mechanical engineer and a programmer. That's basically robotics there for you, right? They are a physical being. They're not software, but of course they live through software and the code. So I think that my history perfectly fit what I'm doing now.
So basically, you mentioned before we started talking on the show that you read an article in the year 2005. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's how it started. I was always kind of fascinated by robotics the way everyone is, because you see them in a movie and stuff like that. But when this interest got more took a bigger part of my life, and was when I read an article in 2005 in New Scientist about an area called Claytronics. At that time, I didn't do much about it, but it kind of stuck in my mind, and saying that, okay, this is going to be big. I know it. There's something here, but I didn't really know where to start doing anything about it. So it kind of just simmered. In 2008, I read another article, and then I really got into this and started digging. Found a lot of scientific papers to read, and eventually attended my first robotics scientific conference and met proper scientists. It's an IEEE conference called IROS, and it was in France in 2008. And since then, I've just gotten deeper and deeper into this. In the beginning, mostly studying the area, finding out how does it work, what can we do, what can't we do, what's science fiction and what is science fact. And then in 2008, I started a blog, Flexibility Envelope, where I occasionally, not often enough, write posts on this area called modular robotics. I find it just enormously fascinating.
Can you tell me that website again, Pierre, so I can go to it?
Flexibility Envelope.
Oh, okay. That's your blog. You mentioned that before. Okay.
Yeah. So that's basically, I took it, when they design a new aircraft, they talk about flight envelope, and they develop the flight envelope so that first they fly really carefully, then they start to do different maneuvers. And for a fighter jet, of course, they push the envelope by really going to the edge. They don't do that with an airliner, of course, because it's not interesting. So what I was looking at, modular robotics, I saw that this is going to increase our flexibility, or expand our flexibility envelope, so to say. So that's how the name came about.
Okay.
I write there occasionally. I put up news and things relating to modular robotics. I also have my own podcast focusing on modular robotics, where I talk to scientists, entrepreneurs, and others.
Can you take us through this website, Pierre?
Yeah, so it's basically very straightforward. There's basically some posts. I also publish my schedule. It's probably way out of date now. So
Okay.
if you go to a conference or if you go to something else, you can find out where I am. So if you want to talk about robotics, I'm always happy to do that. It doesn't matter if you know nothing about robotics, because you know your field of operations. If you do one thing, robotics is certain to affect it over the coming 20 years. So I'm interested in talking to end users too. So even if you're a doctor and you don't use any form of robotics today, I'd like to talk to you and see how you could use robotics in the future.
So you do consulting.
Yeah, I do a little bit, not that much. I do help startups now and then, and I'm happy to do consulting too. And then, of course, we have some guest posts. So sometimes people write stuff that I find appropriate for the blog, and it can be on there. And of course, we come to interviews. As I said, I have my own podcast focusing on modular robotics, and we've done a number of interviews for that one. And I've also been fortunate enough to take part in a general podcast called Robots Podcast, started in Switzerland, and do general interviews in the robotics field together with them. And it's been an amazing experience. And I joined them in 2011, and we recently released our 200th episode. So they've done such an enormous job and such a great job, the team, to do 200 interviews since 2006.
Where is that? Where is that there?
In robotics, you can find it there.
Oh, is it here off this site? Is there a link off this site for that?
Yeah, there are links off the sites for that. That's the ones I have done, although I, of course, see that I should add the ones I've done more recently than that.
I see. There you go. Resources and links, it's off here.
Yeah, I also have a Twitter feed per blog that should be on the site there too. So if you want to join me on Twitter, you're welcome to do that. I tweet news and things about mostly modular robotics, but if it's interesting, also general robotics.
Okay, and robots in depth. That's where the robots in depth?
Yeah, robots in depth. So what I thought about the audio podcasting, I love to meet these people and hear their stories because they're so amazing, from boats catching fire to companies surviving on credit cards and side projects, and these amazing projects where they build 1,024 robots as a student. And I was thinking, how can I develop this? How can I make it even better? And what I thought was that for the general people, for people in general, this sounds either like science fiction and I'm not going to care about it, or it sounds scary. And what I was thinking is that if people see that these are regular people doing these developments, being researchers, being entrepreneurs, they would take it in and get used to the fact that robotics is coming, and also do not fear, and they won't feel unnecessary fear for this revolution, because I think it's going to be mostly positive for everyone. So what I was thinking then, I looked at video cameras and thought, they're getting cheap nowadays. You can buy some great cameras for perfectly okay money, right? Yeah. And I was thinking, maybe I can do a video show as I've done my audio podcasts. And I looked more and more into it. I started to research what I would need to do to make a video podcast or a video show. And eventually I was able to start that, and that is Robotics in Depth. You can find 7 episodes online now, and soon we're going to be coming out once a week with interviews with everyone in robotics: researchers, students, entrepreneurs, professors, government officials, anyone, once a week.
You know, Pierre, I'm like probably most people. When I think robotics, I think of a robot moving. But the more I read about it, they said, no, it's just basically almost anything that's mechanized independently. Could you define robotics, please?
I didn't mention, but I'm also a member of an ISO, International Standards Organization committee, working on standards in modular robotics. And the ISO have a definition, and that is it should be able to move in 2 degrees of freedom. So your dishwasher although it runs a program, isn't a robot because it cannot move in 2 degrees of freedom. So what I say about when I define a robot, it should sense the world around it with some form of a sensor, temperature, cameras, microphones, any kind of sensor. It should then process this input and draw a conclusion from it, do calculation, and then it should go out and modify its physical behavior based on this calculation, so this interpretation of the world around it. So maybe a robot that drives around in like a self-driving car, it would either stop, it would turn left and turn right, depending on the environment around it. This is why when we're talking about stock trading, for instance, they say it's robot stock trading. Technically, that's not a robot because it's only in the software. It's not actually affecting the real world in any way. It's not moving around in the real world. It's not moving objects around. So that's algorithmic trading, not robotics trading. But you're right in that a robot moves around in the world. It does something in the world or to the world.
Yeah, there are some programs. I'm sure there's some programs in Europe too on medical robotics that basically there's one at Case Western. I don't know if you've run across the scientists there. Have you run across those scientists there?
No, I can't remember meeting anybody from that particular project. But yes, of course, there's major robotics program going on in all countries in the world.
Yeah.
And also in medical robotics, it's a tough field to enter because approval processes are very long, and what you have to do to get your product out there is very challenging, not only from a robotics perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. You have to get your thing approved by, in the America, it would be the FDA, etc.
Right.
And that's very challenging. But of course, it's also very motivating because you can really help somebody. If they're sick, we can heal them. And I mean, I'm always in awe of you doctors doing that every day. And if we don't have our health, what do we have, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, I ran across an article of 10 uses of robotics in medicine, and there's a lot that aid the elderly. Robotic devices that help an elderly person eat, even things like that will be getting an increasingly larger role probably in many parts of medicine. Now, of course, many people know of you mentioned previously the Da Vinci robot. What was your first brush with the Da Vinci? It's been around a while, right?
Yeah, I've seen them in exhibitions and fairs and conferences I go to. I also had the pleasure of visiting Intuitive Surgical and testing the machine there, and it's an amazing machine. But it's also a very complicated machine, and they take a very long time to develop. You mentioned elderly assistive devices, and those are much easier to develop, and they can also be very significant. For instance, I know that there's work on using exoskeletons to support and augment balance, so that when we get older and we have a hard time walking, this machine can add that little bit of help we need, but we can still keep walking the way we usually do. We can stay active, stay physically active, which of course helps us feel better and helps us avoid a lot of issues. Can also be great in rehabilitation. And also simpler devices if you not call it medicine, but healthcare. The whole hospital can use robots for distribution of everything from food to linen to medication. And these they can relate to patients in the form of, if you're in the hospital, you have a right to privacy. You want your privacy when you're being treated. And having a robotic cleaner might be better than a human cleaner, because of course the robot is not going to tell on you. The robot doesn't see you as a human being. It just sees you as an obstacle it's supposed to avoid when it's doing the vacuum cleaning, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't contain the same advanced sensors. It isn't as advanced as a human being. We see many of these things. Absolutely.
Well, I don't know if you had a program called the Jetsons in Sweden. But
We didn't have that, and I was probably a bit too young. But yeah, Rosie from the Jetson would be an amazing product.
yeah, they had a lot of these things that are happening. They had robots, just like you say, that aided not just the elderly, but aided anybody in bringing the paper, bringing drinks, etc. But it can be useful in certain settings. And
Absolutely.
we just had the exoskeleton people on. We had a hangout with them from San Francisco. And they were talking about their exoskeleton. They had just returned from a conference in Saudi Arabia, and they won a prize, and they were all excited. And now there are, as you probably know, there's a hybridization of these sciences. In other words, robotics they're trying to get a mind-brain interface, so they can so a person that's paraplegic or quadriplegic can actually move the exoskeleton through mind waves. So sometimes it's not just straight robotics, but it's a combination of a neural interface, so that the mind actually can control the robot or enhance the thoughts or enhance movements. And of course, some people have thought, wow, exoskeletons, that'll be great to make super athletes, make you stronger. And matter of fact, the gentleman doing the presentation of his exoskeleton mentioned that the construction industry is interested in what he's doing to make construction workers stronger.
And also, of course, relieve fatigue and workplace-related injuries. It would also be very important for emergency personnel, because they need to be. They already are superhuman, but they could really benefit from that assistance.
What other areas, Per, besides the Da Vinci and the exoskeleton, have you seen any elderly assistance? Any other areas where you think there's going to be a significant impact in medicine and healthcare?
If we look at the close time frame, where we need to do something in a couple of years, or 2 to 5 years or something like that, I think it's going to be simpler devices, but they can be very significant, even though they're simpler. So we talked about distribution of food in the hospital, giving human staff more time with the patient. We can talk about food distribution. We can talk about, and also drugs distribution is an area I think that's going to develop, because that some form of drugs are desirable for other people than the people that are sick. And also, if you really need to get the correct medicine at the correct time, and we need to know this so that your treatment progresses in the best possible way. I also saw a automatic mobile sprinkler, kind of a fire extinguisher on wheels. And that was very interesting to see. I haven't seen it in real life. I hope to do so this summer. So this is actually parked in an elderly person's home, or I would presume anybody's home. And when it detects a fire, it drives up to the fire and works like an automated fire extinguisher containing only water. And if you attack the fire early, it's very easy to put it out. And of course, for an elderly person, for a handicapped person, this of course has to be automated, because they're not going to be able to run around and do this by themselves. For more advanced applications like the exoskeleton we talked about, the Da Vinci we talk about, there's many opportunities to do very advanced stuff in robotics, but that stuff takes a lot of time to get to work right. And it also has to go through the approvals process of FDA and other things. So yeah, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the medical field, but it is challenging.
Well, you know, Per, as you know, 3D printing is another industry that's getting more and more impactful in medicine. And one of the areas, I know that there's some limitations with 3D printing as far as copying robots and copying metal. Have you seen any significant inroads? Yeah, because I know robotics, one of the things about it sometimes is a little expensive to make robots, to make robotic machinery. Has 3D printing affected making a little more less expensive parts of robots and etc.?
Absolutely, 3D printing is a very big thing. But as you say, 3D printing in metal, 3D printing complicated machinery is we're still not yet there, in my opinion. Yeah, we can 3D print materials like metal, but the machines are very expensive, and that makes the parts very expensive. But medicine is also an area where expense and cost isn't as important as in maybe a toy or something, because if we use it to cure somebody, it's of course worth it. But it also allows us to design things differently, because we don't have to make them so that a mill or a lathe can make them. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a video out there of the new Atlas robot from Boston Dynamics. And it's walking very beautifully. It does so in the very hard terrain of a forest with snow.
Uneven terrain.
Yeah, and it's being pushed around and it's being pushed over, and it can get up by itself. And parts of why it can do this is because the legs are 3D printed metal and very strong, very light, with built-in tubing for hydraulic fluids and other things. So 3D printing is a very big thing to make components. And I also think that the challenge for 3D printing is cost, and also mechanisms. That's very hard for 3D printing. It's going to take a very long time before you can print a mechanical watch and just wind it and it's going to work. But robotics can come in there and add those mechanisms, and pieces can be 3D printed and standard robotics pieces can be used, and successful robots could be developed. But yeah, 3D printing is very significant.
Well, you mentioned something a little bit earlier about how that, say, a doctor or a medical person thought he could do something, and he really doesn't have to know about robotics. He could be able to tell you an idea, and you'd be able to translate it into some kind of robotic tech.
Yeah, that's and I know also that researchers and entrepreneurs are really, really longing for this connection with the end user, in this case, the doctor that treats his patient. We need this connection with somebody that has an application idea, because we need that direction that having a customer with specific demands gives the research. So there's a lot of good researchers out there. And if you approach your local university or your local technology hub, I'm sure that they would be thrilled to work with you in developing robots that somebody needs, and that also develop a specific robot that they, with their knowledge about robotics and your knowledge in your domain, as a doctor in this case, can together figure out what is medically desirable and what is robotically possible, and do those two together. I think that's where we need to go now. I think robotics is ready for business. The early days where we had to do mostly basic research we're more or less out of that now. Of course, we still continue to do basic research, but we can also do application and application development. But then we need an end user. We need somebody, as a doctor, to come and say to us, I have this problem. Can we develop a robot that helps us?
Well, Per, let me just tell you of some experience I had that was relevant to what you're saying. We had a conference on Google Glass in medicine, which you may know a little bit about. There's certain areas of medicine where it can be useful in surgery and education, etc. And I had, and this particular platform of Google Hangout, which you're using now, I thought, hey, this is a great platform to get the developers together with the doctors easily, rather than having to make an appointment to go see the doctor at the hospital, explain the idea, and then take time up from the doctor for the developer. we did a couple of hangouts with developers and the doctors, and the doctors and developers were kind of kicking around ideas. It didn't go too far, but I think this technology of hangouts has great promise in getting people like robotic people and doctors and the medical people together to kind of brainstorm ideas before
Especially
physically
the
meet them.
researchers and developers needs this, because we know robotics, but we don't know what needs to be done out there in society.
Well, I'm going to keep that in mind. If I run into people or they mention something, because I think hangouts are a great first, I think, would be a great first step to meet you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And trying to, because it's so easy, it's so low cost, we can do a lot of them.
Yes.
And then the two people are going to meet, and they're going to have, one person has the solution and the other one have a problem. So
now you getting away from just medical robotics, what area of robotics do you see really growing?
I would say that we are many areas are being addressed. You know that, for instance, self-driving cars is growing very strongly, and we hope that in 10 to 15 years or something like that, we might have self-driving cars that are a practical proposition for the general public. I think that that's going to take quite some time. It's a complicated problem, and it has to work all the time. But then we see, for instance, many niches in our professional life. Warehousing, manufacturing is going to be even more roboticized. We're looking at last mile delivery from when you order something from Amazon or somebody else. We're going to see efforts around getting it from the post office to your door, which today is very challenging for a robot. But we see them. There's a lot of talk about doing it with a drone. I've never been fond of that idea. It has an enormous array of problems. There is, however, a company called Starship, started by the same people who developed Skype, which is another way of doing these hangouts. And they are delivering it with a small wheeled vehicle. And I find that project is probably more likely to succeed in the near future. But that means we can produce something using robotics, we could store it using robotics, and we can distribute it using robotics. And this is going to make customization. You get exactly what you want, rather than some generic packaging containing what most people want. And you can order it at any time. And it gets delivered to you very, very quickly.
Well, I went to a robotics competition about 3 years ago here in Miami. With Boston Dynamics, when Boston Dynamics was alone, as well as like 6 or 7 robotic teams. They had competitions. I don't know if you've ever been to one of those. They had robotic competition. Yeah.
That was probably a DARPA Robotics Challenge, was it?
It was something like that. And the funny thing, Per, was, after the show, Google bought all the companies.
Yeah. This year, the next year, they bought them before the competition.
Really?
So they didn't even wait for the competition to be over.
But yeah, Boston Dynamics used to be independent, but now it's part of Google. Does Google kind of control the robotics field?
No, the robotics field is very deep and wide. So although Google is doing great work in the robotics field, and they are really pushing for it, I don't see any nation or area dominating it totally. It's simply too big for that.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. I know one thing Google's working on is a low-cost Da Vinci.
Yeah.
That costs 1/3. And you mentioned the expense of robotics machinery. The Da Vinci machine is more than $1 million. I don't know exactly what's the price.
A lot of money, I would presume.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to make one as like 1/3 the cost of Da Vinci, and I think they've almost finished it. They even have a name for it. I don't recall the name, but it's definitely a product and definitely coming. And I know it's a lot of hospitals that's out of their reach. And another, just a quick remark before we leave, is that the Da Vinci surgery is more than just urological procedures. the gallbladders removed. They even do heart surgery with the robotic surgery, and some neurosurgeons use robotics for brain surgery. So there's a lot of areas where it's impacting, and of course, the most influence has been in obstetrics for hysterectomies, etc., and urology. So, but there are other areas of medicine like general surgery. It's fairly strong.
Yeah, but that's just amazing work, and I see that the robotics is going to come in and be as prevalent and as accepted as the cell phone is today. But they're going to be out there. They're going to be helping us in our work. They're going to be lifting heavy loads. They're going to be doing dangerous or repetitive or tasks that we simply don't want to do or can't do. And it's going to be the next revolution in business life, where we went from human power building things, slaves basically, then we went to horses and basic machines, and then we're now entering the robotic era, and where the machine have more intelligence and more freedom, autonomy, so to speak. So yeah, many areas: agriculture, forestry, building and construction of infrastructure. Many of these areas is going to be deeply impacted by this over longer time. It's not going to be as quick as the internet, because significant developments has to happen, and significant energy has to be put into making these robots. So it's going to be a bigger revolution, but it's going to take longer time. That's my take on the time scale of things, so to speak.
Well, you know, Per, we have to encourage our genomics brothers to work harder on making our lives longer, so we can see more changes in the future.
Yeah, I want to be around for this.
Yeah.
Check that. I want to be around and follow this development as it goes along over a long time. So.
Yeah, well, you know, Per, I'm 66 years old at the end of my medical career, and all these wonderful things are happening. It's like, God darn, I wish I was a kid again to see.
I feel the same way. Yeah.
But maybe genomics will get us something in the next couple of years. Who knows? Who knows?
Even robotics can come in and help us by stay active, and therefore also stay fit and live longer that way. So yeah.
That's a possibility. Okay, Per, I'm going to stop the broadcast and we can chat after. But thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for listening.